up this morning, world still on fire. Polluted skies and the seas climbing higher. Leaders talk big, but they all just lie. Truth gets buried while the good folks cry. It's the shit show, rolling every day. But we ain't giving up, no way. We're gonna live the truth, come what may. Try and fix the world before it slips away. Science gets silenced, facts under attack. Healthcare's broken, truth don't get no slack. People scroll.
Welcome to the Shit
Hey.
Show. My name's Andrea Edwards.
My name's David Coe.
And my name is the very last minute appearing Joe Augustine. Sorry
Yes,
I
I
wasn't
was-
around for any of the pre-show stuff, but here I am, and even more unprepared than usual. If you can imagine that.
Well, it was all a bit anxious. It was David's computer's been going in and out, so he's on his phone, and then you didn't turn up until I started the countdown. So, and I'm sorry it's a bit duller than the last ones, but I figure we can't keep doing the same intro. But we're live everywhere, so that's good news.
No, I think this is great, because I think that I've been noticing in the past 2 weeks after the war, that there have been a lot of kind of AI generated material purporting to be, kind of the expert of this, the expert of that, commenting on how the war is and everything else, and it's been really disrupting to kind of thinking what really is going on.
Yeah,
I think it is so.
The music is AI. Joe
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah, but I like the fact that we're just counting down. That's what it is. We're counting down.
Yeah, right. That's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah,
I wanted to do a heavy metal theme, but
oh,
Joe
that's
went
good.
softer.
Yeah, something from that Eurovision Song Contest when I don't know which country was, Iceland won it or something, or Norwegian.
Yeah.
That heavy
Anyway,
metal
Joe,
band.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you in the space?
Definitely in the space now.
Well, welcome to welcome to the show that basically the world seems to be living up to every day. It's like the show's name was too far, and maybe it wasn't. I don't know. It's just every single week, every single day, something new comes along, and this show seems to be more and more appropriately named.
Yeah.
Joe,
I just wanted to tell you, I have literally heard shit show on mainstream media at least 10 times in the last week. So
And they were talking
we are
about
so on brand. Yeah, exactly. Because people often say, "Oh, that's not an appropriate title," and I'm like, "It's the most appropriate title in the world right now."
Yeah, it is now.
We
Well,
keep
it's
doing
going
it.
to be. It is going to be. So.
Anyway, sorry, Joe. Back to you.
No, so I was just going to say that on the show, we always try to bring on diverse points of view. And I speak now with no context at all, because I know that we're supposed to have Joanne Flinn joining us. I don't have my usual notes in front of me right now, so I'm going completely off of memory. As I recall, he was a nice person we knew from the days of speaking.
All right, I'll do it.
So
Okay.
sweet there, Joe.
Well, Joe, I'll take over. All right. So,
yeah,
Joanne Flinn is a friend of Joe and I's, as you just said, and Joanne was recently announced as being on the Thinkers50 Radar for 2026, which is huge. She's the chairperson of the ESG Institute. She's author of Greensight, the Sustainability Guide for Company Directors. She's a keynote speaker, a prolific author, trust me, prolific, and also an artist. And right now, she's actually decided to think out loud as she puts together her next book, which she can talk about in a minute. But welcome, Joanne.
Hello. It is very lovely to be here with you. I suspect there'll be a few friendship-based asides, so everyone who's listening, look forward to the fun.
Yeah. So one of the things you just did recently, just so we can give everyone a little bit more of an intro into you, is you decided to write your next book out loud. It's the first time you're doing it, and it's called Clearsight. So the first one was Greensight. This is Clearsight, The Director's Guide to Long-Term Value. So why are you writing it in public? What do you think? How does that help?
I was looking at what's going on today, and part of what was said earlier in the opening is things are moving so rapidly. Chapters that made sense literally 5 weeks ago have to be seriously recalibrated because of what's happened. The risk profiles of the world, the decisions that leaders need to be taking based on that has just, shifted. I'm going to say, I've lived through some pretty big economic turbulences, as have quite a few of the people in this room, and this is up there in terms of magnitude. So I was just like, okay, the best way of writing in a space where it's fast moving, I thought was going to be most serving to have a useful outcome for people would be to write and go, this is where the thinking is now, and if something else happens, like I did this week, then for that to be built in and iterated in as we move forward, rather than producing at the end and going, look, here I was as a genius. No, this is live understanding and sense making. And so I thought the Substack structure would create a platform and transparency around that. And then would also help co-create learning, insight, and action, which is ultimately why I write, is to help leaders take action that creates better value for themselves, their people, the communities, and the planet. And so this seemed to be just a pragmatic way of doing that rather than keeping it to myself for the next 6 to 9 months.
Yeah, no, I totally, when it comes to the polycrisis, everything's moving so quickly now. How could you possibly publish something 6 to 9 months time and have it relevant, right? Just elections changed everything. All right. And so you got your Thinkers50, it's the Thinkers50 Radar, which if you don't know about it, that's a massive hat tip to you. And I was really proud of you for getting that. But can you tell us what you were doing when you found out, and how did it land?
It landed actually as an email in my inbox from someone I didn't know. And I'm sure some of the people listening have had this happen. You get these emails and you're never quite sure whether you're going to click on them because there's always something else to get done. And I did, and it was this beautiful email. You've been recognized on Thinkers50 Radar. What I hadn't realized is that Forbes and the Financial Times call the Thinkers50, the 50 list, the equivalent of the Oscars for management consulting, for their business thinking. And being on the radar to be on that list is just like amazing. I had no idea that I was even being considered. So it came totally out of the blue. And of course, in that kind of thing, they tell you, but then say this is embargoed until, whatever date. And I was actually visiting my mother, and it was sort of like, okay, there's I'm going to tell one person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
so
good on you, mate.
I bounced across to my mother, acting like a 6-year-old who was completely and utterly delighted, because my inner 6-year-old was very delighted, and shared it with her. So nice. that was what I was doing when I actually heard.
Yeah. Well, we're going to change the structure a little bit. Usually we start with an interview, but Joanne is all over the news, so she has to be when you're talking about stuff like this. So we're going to start with some sort of impressions on the war. But before we do that, before I put the agenda together last night, just a couple of things that have happened. So we've got a new Prime Minister in Nepal, the former rapper. He's rapper, not DJ, right? But it's a youth vote, but they're saying they're going to get a 7% increase in GDP, or they're going to have growth of 7%, sorry. And I'm like, the other things that have stopped Nepal growing, apart from corruption and nepotism and all those other things, like climate impacts and extreme weather events, they're still going to be happening. But that's an interesting one. The Supreme Leader in Iran has released his first statement. He's not recorded. There's thoughts that he was injured in the bombing, and that's why he hasn't been seen in public yet. But I figure, keeping him safe is probably on the bigger priority. And of course, there was a crash in Iraq of a refueling aircraft, a US refueling aircraft, and it was not a wartime incident. It was. It looked like two American planes crashed or something happened. So, anyway, the war. So I'll start featuring people, but there's a lot going on. Like David was saying, there's a lot of AI nonsense. Just wanted to get impressions of what you're noticing. Who wants to go first?
No,
David,
I can have a go. Well, I don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I mean, I think the one thing that is very focused in the reporting is all about Middle East in that way. It's all about the oil. And I think the repercussions of the oil is not really being considered. I do think that there's an issue here for me very much that, this is kind of China's pivotal to this. And exactly how China is going to, I kind of foresee a really cold meeting as Trump meets with Xi Jinping next month. I kind of see that as, a lot of kind of polite standing around, not really, Xi Jinping not really saying very much, and Trump really not saying very much, and in a kind of a posturing to say, okay, right, who's going to move first in that way. So I see the coldness, so between US and China kind of increasing, and the situation in the Middle East is really just kind of amplifying it, and in some sense preparing that stage.
I actually wonder if that meeting's going to go ahead.
Well, that would be. I don't think the Chinese would cancel it, so it'd be the US that would do that.
Yeah. All right, Joe.
Well, I mean, I wanted to talk about the proliferation of AI, especially about in this area. I think the thing that you're probably realizing right now is just basically in this particular area, there's much more content now coming on AI. AI content was always around before that. It's just that now it's popular to speak about the war, so people are employing it for that purpose as well. So I don't think there's been an increase per se in AI, but in this particular space where it's hard news or it's more the harder stuff, it's showing up more simply because it is the prevalent tool. People are trying to. I've just been tracking the AI content has just been used in whatever way. It's used as a way to leverage yourself and to create lots and lots of content. And now the popular content is about the war. So that's what, and it just happens to be now it's come into your neck of the woods. So you're seeing a lot more of it. But I don't think AI has changed in terms of how much its presence has been online. It's just more evident to us now because it's come into our space. Right.
Okay. All right, Anna, we're going to talk about information and how it's being used in this war.
Well, the thing that's actually, when I saw that as an opening question, the piece that's really struck me is that I've got two to follow on from, the broad question of the topic and then Joe's one, is that what's, to me, is so powerful about what's happening right now is that we literally have a live stress test of transition resilience going on. The countries that have converted more of their energy usage to renewables or non-fossil fuel have comparatively high resilience to what's going on. And the countries that have had the least are the ones most exposed to the economic shocks.
Have you got any examples of countries that are better prepared?
Okay, so like this was a rapid piece of deep research, otherwise known as done by my able assistant Claude.
Right.
Not bad, i.e. I haven't gone back to the original sources to verify it, but just headline things. So 5 countries that have done comparatively well off: Iceland, Norway, who's probably going to be a net gainer because most of their fossil fuel, they've got high renewables, and B, guess what? They're not caught by the Straits of Hormuz. Brazil and Sweden. all have very
Right.
high levels of renewability. The countries that are most challenged are actually going to look like they're going to be in this part of the world. So Japan, evidently something like about 95% of its energy usage is imported.
Yeah, it's massive.
Yeah, so that's like and a very vast amount of that's coming out of the Middle East. South Korea is up there. India, Thailand, it's a significant part of their national budget. So cost inflation is going to be a big thing. China, yes, but its reserves give it a bigger holding pattern. So the funniest piece that I've been noticing, particularly in the last 24 hours, is just some of the commentators going, yeah, well, you know what? People who've got the renewables base or the non-fossil fuel bases have more independence. So not just is it a live stress test, it's actually a stress test of sovereign resilience. And that's just like, hold, people have been going, oh, well, wait a second, your wind will go out or your sun will go out. Well, guess
I think
what?
the correct term is ugly windmills. You're supposed to say ugly windmills.
Yeah.
No. Well, I'm not putting the value judgment on them, but it's fascinating, isn't it? Because basically, once you put them in, you've got 20 to 30 years where you're not worried about somebody going to shut your power supply down. It's got to be a very different type of sabotage to do that in. So it's, to me, that's a very unusual piece to come out of the current circumstance. I don't think Donald Trump anticipated that this is what it would also prove.
Yeah.
I think the 4-letter word coming out of the renewable camp is ha ha.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly.
All right. So just from my impressions, so I'm sort of listening to everybody, trying to pay attention to everything, sort of noticing what you guys are talking about within the context. And I thought Carol Cadwaladar, which we'll talk about something she said later, but she's like, the usual talking heads are out, talking about what's going on. What I'm finding really interesting is the vast majority of people who are talking are not talking with any long-term perspective. There is only a handful of people that are really speaking about the longer-term risks versus talking about the war. There's a massive contradiction with what they're talking about from a war perspective to what the climate scientists are talking about from an emissions perspective, and that's a real clash. We're not hearing about the expected emissions from war, which some of the impacts have been discussed, but how many emissions have been released just in these last 2 weeks? And we know that from other wars, recent wars, but it will take time. The conversation beyond the geopolitical impacts, it seems very few people are capable of doing it. And then, of course, we've all got friends and acquaintances who are potentially speaking from a side, and I'm finding a lot of people that I'm talking to just don't have that any longer term view. For them, it's like, we've always talked about war in the past versus the way we should be talking about war now with all of these other implications in the mix. So they were talking, the 9 planetary boundaries, the fossil fuel or emissions release has gone up into catastrophic territory. So that bigger risk piece just isn't in the conversation. The information warfare is just like something, like, it's really spectacular. And we're going to talk about the media blackout for this war, which is different for the US. But the US isn't winning this information warfare. And they usually do. And that's, I think, something that is going to be a really interesting part of this story. So that's kind of some of my takeaways, which we'll obviously get into as we discuss more. But I want to bring Anna back up into the hot seat, because I want her to start with, we're going to get back into the war, don't worry. Let's just start by talking about what is the work that you're doing and what are your goals, so people get to know you more.
So the work that I do is at 2 levels. I work with business leaders and investors on how do you improve the long-term resilience of your business model, or your business portfolio if you're an investor. So that's because my legacy industry background is financial services. So that's the frame of reference that I come in. But my professional focus on that is how do you accelerate business transition and business transformation. So we bring together these two lenses of, okay, so what's the economics, but how do you do transition well? And the fundamental thing about how you do transition well is if you don't pay attention to people, even great tech won't get you there.
Right.
So there's this combined piece on that. And then, as you know, my early background was in the sustainability space. So the long-term lens of what is business and how is the way we do business contributing to the context that we have in terms of the 9 planetary boundaries and the ability of business to deliver a world that is within those planetary boundaries or not.
Okay.
Is one of the things that I actively look at, and we work with business leaders around, well, what does transition actually look like for you? How do you create value and a stronger outcome so that there's actually a future that I think is worth living?
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So before we get into your first Substack piece, you talk a lot about ISSB-aligned reporting. So there's a lot of people who have absolutely no idea what that means. Do you want to explain it so we can start from an uninformed position?
Oh, excellent. Look, if I use any bits of alphabet soup, just say, hey, could you describe what that is? Because, of course, the curse of someone who works within the zone is we use jargon because it saves us explaining it in full, but that's not fair on something like this. So ISSB is a standard of reporting that's come out of the International Accounting Standards Board. About 5 years ago, they set up a process to say, okay, we need to update our accounting standards to bring into these topics that in other conversations we've talked about as ESG. So traditionally in businesses have had to report what their profit and loss statement is, what their balance sheet is, what the cash flows, and finance has been very much designed around that. And so the accounting standards have been designed around this. So ISSB is the International Accounting Board's IFRS, for those of you who want yet another acronym, have pulled together from several legacy account reporting standards into ISSB. So it's being adopted currently by 32 countries. Korea is doing its review to bring that online. Singapore listed companies need to do it. Australia has it on. Indonesia and Malaysia have it underway. So it's a upcoming reporting standard that is at the same level as when a board, and this is something for senior executives and investors, the goal is to provide transparency so that people that are investing can actually see into what's going on. So the financial statements have been one of the core pieces. Directors have a fiduciary duty to issue financial statements that they sign off in blood that say these are true and fair and accurate representation. So what's happening with ISSB is that a standard is saying what you doing around sustainability. Just to keep it super simple, there's subsections in there. You need to be disclosing that. Now, what's really fascinating in that? So this is a big shift from the point of view of transparency. So I know what the title is. This is a different kind of reporting. It's required to be if you're a listco. So if you're on a stock exchange in an increasing number of countries, this is compulsory. If you want to stay listed, that must do it. Okay. And here's the interesting kicker. Sometimes you got to look at the wordings of these things to say, what does that really mean? And there's a lovely paragraph in there that says, you don't need to do, this is recommended, but you don't need to do. If you've done it, you need to disclose it. And it's about essentially the equivalent of having a 1.5 degree plan that used to be part of the EU regulations, but got axed from business pressure late last year. So here's the thing. If you don't have one, you don't need to disclose it. Now, David, you come from the investment world too. If someone doesn't, if you have it, you have to disclose it. If you don't have it, you don't need to disclose it. Now, if somebody doesn't disclose it, what does it say to you? They don't have a plan. What does it say to your view of their risk profile and therefore their investability? Up or down?
Well, I think this is always going to be the situation of how people want to do that. So from the hedge fund perspective, I think there's a whole difference between the different institutions in the different aspects of the investment world. So you've got the retail investment world, you've got the institutional investment world, and then you've essentially got the sort of the private capital investment world. And in the private capital investment world, probably don't care. And a lot more money, a lot of money is moving into that, even from the institution and other places. So the pressure is actually going to come from the fact that you've got public investment institutions like a pension, a public pension, or even a private pension in that way, public as in relating to retail in that sense. It's going to have to come from there to filter on through. The institutions, the brokering intermediary institutions are going to go on through and do their responsibility and actually wanting to report what they can out of it. But the private capital end of it is just going to ignore it.
Yep.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, Joanne, I'll give you the answer you're looking for. Yes, it's bad.
Well done, Joe. Excellent leading question. But David, I love David's point, and I wasn't asking it because I know these conversations are more fun when it's an exchange, not one person talking. But see, this is the thing: is different parts of the financial world care about different pieces. Some of them have very long-term horizons and different fiduciary duties, so they care about stuff over a very different horizon to people that are looking at an investment from the point of view is, what am I going to make out of it on the next 3 to 5 years? It's very different than if you're going, what is it going to do over the next 10 to 20 or 50? And so appreciating that there's these different parts in what will push. So to your question, does that sort of give people enough of a framework about what ISSB is? But it's something that listcos are having to do. It's public statement, boards have to sign off. And in some countries, they're also making statements that you, as a board member, you can't cover your liabilities with directors and officers insurance.
All right. So my short, brief takeaway, like Joe's been sharing. So it's ISSB is sustainability for bean counters in publicly listed companies. Is that correct?
Pretty much. That keeps it super simple. But the thing is, the bean counters are getting off looking at the financial statements, just purely as financial statements, and the historical. They're having to do what's called forward-looking statements, so they can't look at the past. They have to look forward. So it's really actually quite a big shift for the bean counters. This is a whole new universe. But it also means for people like you and I, it's like, oh, they're going to be thinking about. They're going to be processing information and publicly disclosing different things than they've had to. That'll change some of the conversations with certain parts of the financial market, to David's point. Not all, but to some sections.
All right, so David,
I think what the ISSB is aiming in that way is very much about bringing the actual kind of physical environmental risks to within kind of a company's accounting in that perspective. I think that's the way to think about that. Traditionally, it's always been about thinking, if you look at a balance sheet, you've got your revenues, you've got your assets, your liabilities, expenditures, and you've different columns in there, and you sort of match them up as you go along, and you total them along in that way. And what that does is it tries to say that the numbers tell everything, essentially. But we all know that you get a lot of creative accounting, you can do a lot of fudging around in that sense. However, accounting itself is a very, very powerful tool, a very, very powerful mechanism for people to reflect about what is the world that they're seeing. And so what the ISSB is doing, most fundamentally, is actually coming along and saying, look, you want to create this you need to incorporate the actual physical environment. It's a bit like the situation. If you think about a situation where you have, a big fish in a pond eating up small fish, and if there's too many small fish, there aren't enough of them, and then the big fish dies off. So even you may be big fish, you get affected along in there, and then small fish may recover otherwise. And what the ISSB essentially is saying is actually, you got to account for the fact that you need water. Both of you need water to live. So the accounting numbers will tell you about the big fish and the small fish, but now you got to account for the fact that you all need water in there as well.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of big transformation that is bringing along to the investment world, to the business world, to the listed companies in that way. I find it very, very sad in that way that it was the International Accounting Board that brought this along through IFRS, but they then decided it should be a separate entity along to be ISSB, which is a shame because it's actually separating out against sustainability from the center of the thing. You don't need more separations. It should just simply be the fact that, this is part of what accounting needs to account for.
Okay, all right. I'm going to give it just a minute, and I'm going to keep this moving because I wasn't expecting the ISSB to devolve, because obviously you guys know what you're talking about here. But I want to keep us moving because we've got a lot to get through. But okay, so you've started on Substack. If you're on Substack, just go and search for Joanne Flinn. But the title is "The Rules Simplified and the Risks Did Not." And so basically what you're talking about is how the world just simplified ESG regulations, with the US pulling back, Europe apparently softening enforcement. But then you said, so why is the commercial pressure? I wanted to ask, why is the commercial pressure on businesses actually intensifying, not easing?
So just to help keep pace along. So that was the first. That's my first getting out in the world for Clearsight. The commercial pressures for business leaders is intensifying because for a good number of the people that would be listening into this, businesses operate across borders. So at some level, you don't have to like it, but if there's a consistent regulatory standard across the 10 countries you operate in, it's simpler. You've got consistency. Now what's happening is if you're going into the US, you've got one set of stories. If you've got products and services that are trading into EU, you've got a different set. If you've got distribution around Asia, you've got yet another one. It actually makes your operational challenges and your information provision challenges that much more complicated. So great, it looked like it's dropped. Oh no, it's just that operationally it's more complicated. Secondly, some of the regulatory changes are going to be challenged in court in the US, and in the EU already have review clauses built in. So while it might look like it's softening, it doesn't necessarily mean it will stay that way. So that adds to the uncertainty level. So the second area there's that as one bundle. The second area is just because the regulations soften does not mean the physics have changed. Heating is still heating. Water stress is still water stress. Mother Nature's laws have not changed one iota just because man's laws have. And to what David was sharing, earlier on, the reality is we're seeing earlier. Bangkok's already putting heat warnings out. When I used to live in Thailand 25 years ago, we didn't hit 40 degrees until late April, and it's only early March, mid-March. David, your story about big blowing off your feet in London. I mean, these are just things that are new, and we're having to build that into our current ways of doing business. And most businesses are not built for that yet.
All right. And then the next thing you were talking about is it's a divergence. So the US moved one way, the EU adjusted, but actually maintained course. And then the UK went the other direction entirely. And the UK is an actual interesting case. And then multiple jurisdictions, Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, Malaysia, have mandatory ISSB-aligned reporting arriving on schedule. So what does this all mean? And when I sort of think about, the big global corporations I've worked with and for, they tend to follow the country that operates at the highest standard, no matter where they're based, right? Because it just makes everything easier. But what does it all mean?
So in the short run, what it means is the best in class standard was the EU standard that was in place up until late last year, when they basically said, okay, we'll simplify its application. So it's only to the top companies. And then they went and took the need to have a transition plan for 1.5 degree world as part of compulsory component of the corporate sustainability due diligence directive. For those of you who want another acronym, that's CSDDD. Just for fun. Play bingo with these. What else to do with them? So while it might not be regulatory at the moment, it is actually the current best practice. So from a business leader's point of view, in some ways, using best practice that's higher than the current regulatory standard may actually be the smarter mid to long-term play. For that consistency point of view and the fact that things could ratchet back up, and the fact that to our opening pieces, it actually is going to give you greater climate resilience, which is not a bad thing in these days of turbulence.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. And then you have a framework which you call the triple lock, and that's how you make sense of what's actually driving the pressure on organizations. So there's three forces, each are independent, each sufficient on its own to reshape how business operates. So can you explain this and why it's important? The triple lock.
Okay. I'm not going to give all the lines because I want to incentivize those who are listening to actually go and read the full article. And also, we want to keep the pace on this. Subtle plug. You can subscribe for free. So it's good. So the point of the lock is that sometimes you have just one pressure hitting one direction, another pressure hitting another direction, and it doesn't do enough to lock to put enough cumulative pressure to say you need to act, or in this particular case, lock you into space. So you've got no blankety blank 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 choice to modify the language of the title of the show. So one of these ones is with the regulatory pressure apparently softening, but as we've just sort of explored, not really. The commercial pressure is also a significant one. So one of the pieces is that a significant part of the financial markets are paying more and more attention to some of these longer term issues, in part because they have fiduciary duties, in part because there's different costs of capital, in part because the actual long-term returns are significantly better. So there was some data from Bloomberg that said that organizations with a stronger ESG profile, to use a term we're not allowed to use anymore, because you know what? I personally say ESG stands for extraordinarily sensible governance.
Nice.
So, and they identified that basically over the last decade, it was a 650 basis points difference in performance. Which I'm just going like, if I wasn't even being a warm, fuzzy human being who cared about the future, I'd go, that's pretty material. I'd pay attention. So so each one of these is going like, so the people who are saying that the pressure on businesses to look at their performance and their extraordinary sensible governance hasn't really dropped. It's just showing up in a slightly different form.
Right. And it's not as public as it was before, right?
No.
All right. So one of the things you sort of said at the end of your piece is, and underneath all of it, underneath every regulation, every capital signal, every commercial pressure, the same truth holds. Business runs on people and their willingness to bring more than compliance. Take that away and the numbers look fine on the dashboard for a while until they don't. So can you just sort of talk through what you mean there, but also what's giving you sort of hope, and I hate the word hope, but that there is some positive momentum happening?
So I'll start off with the logic and then I'll finish with the human.
Okay.
The logic is that the reality is there are technical solutions to, if we talk about planetary boundaries, there are coherent technical solutions across a good number of them. We're not looking in the space where we don't know how to do it. And in actual fact, in many cases, there actually is the cash and the investability for it. It's getting pieces lined up. If one's greenfielding and putting in needing new energy resources, witness current challenge, it is faster and cheaper to go and put in a renewable energy in many cases, and in many places, than it is to do anything else. And so it's like, if you just want to be hardcore, show me the numbers, I don't give a rat's about anything else. The numbers, the cost curve has been so sufficiently bent that is actually the answer, before one even goes and here's all the extra wonderful goodies and value that come with that choice. So there's there's that side. But part of where that particular quote was, and I love that's the one you took out of it and wanted to quote, is that businesses still run on people. And when people feel less inspired and less interested in their organization, the engagement levels drop, the performance levels drop, the discretionary energy drops. There's one of the chapters in Clearsight is going to be exploring how does this nexus of governance, AI, and human motivation actually start working together or not. Because the fact is we're moving into a world where we have human beings performing, we have agents performing, we still have leader accountability. Like the ultimate governance rule is that human beings are accountable for the decisions. So, and if human beings aren't switched on and caring and engaged, the quality of their decisions drop. So we're the ability for businesses to keep the human beings who actually have to hold the decision-making power interested and leaning in and excited is going to be one of the challenges. And as ever, none of this changes the fact that getting hold of great talent is hard. And if you've got your talent leaving because they're going to somewhere else that's got a better profile, the organization is just slowly hollowing out, not just from a capital side, but also from a human side, which is why, you know, the dashboard numbers may look good and then just go.
Yeah, right. And then you've got the environmental impacts in the mix as well. All right,
Exactly.
Richard, Richard, he's not here today. David or Joe?
Well, I had two questions that came out just now, just incidentally, right? This idea about ESG numbers and the improvement in their performance. Is the ESG the reason for the higher performance, or is it the fact that they have ESG may be a symptom of a well-run company? The fact that they have, you know, ESG tends to indicate that there is a better-run company behind it. So I'm just asking a question there in terms of, you know, causation versus correlation.
So let me answer this based on my own lived experience in this one, Joe, rather than trying to, you know, pull apart Bloomberg's data. Here is that when businesses start looking at the components of ESG as a system and have that system working in place, they're going to be a better run organization. They're going to have higher human performance. They're going to use their resources more effectively. Like it's the feedback loops that a positively designed system starts creating. Like you know, the methodologies we use in terms of business transformation were developed through the scar tissue of seeing what happens when you don't do that. It's like you being healthy or me being healthy. If I only do one thing to be healthy, then I'm going to have a wishy-washy result. But if I do 5 or 6 things, I'm going to get such a much better outcome. And so this is you know, in part, you know, if I pull apart based on the data and the work that I've done, you know, I'm going like, what's happening is those companies are picking up multiple areas and they're getting positive feedback loops across multiple areas, and that's setting up. And so the causation link is kind of not quite there, if you get what I mean, because you got positive, you got feedback loops happening.
Yeah.
Does that
I think
make
there's
sense?
there's a creation of value, which is it's on a different, it's kind of on a different metric. You get some, you know, I mean, feel good vibes are good. I don't think they're bad. They can't be seen as negative value, right? I mean, it's feel good vibes.
Well, and feel good vibes, like just you think about it, just, you know, from your own personal life. When you feel good, do you tend to do slightly higher quality work? Well, a lot of people do. When you feel trust and collaboration with your other colleagues, are you more willing to explore a problem and come to a constructive solution than if there's not trust and collaboration? Short answers, in most cases, yes. Not in all, but in most. And so each one of these things, you know, is like a slice of lapis in a lapis cake. You know, individually, you know, not much, but together. Really
We know what that means.
Everyone here knows what that means, but not necessarily everyone listening. A very yummy cake here, put it that way.
Well, I don't know about that.
I love it. I love it.
So Anna, can I ask you, so in your conversations that you're having with board leaders, business leaders, what's the sense you're getting from them, you know, about what's going on in the world from every perspective, but, you know, from with inside the business, sort of what they're seeing, feeling, hearing, prioritizing. What's your sense? Are they on the ball? Because we don't hear a lot about that.
So what I've seen, so if you had have asked me this question 2.5 weeks ago, I would have had a different answer.
Yeah.
The invasion of another sovereign nation, with all of that, what's going on as a consequence of that, has materially shifted the conversation. The long-term thinkers, the sovereign wealth funds that I've been in discussion with, they're been thinking through these deep issues because they've got long-term portfolios and long-term fiduciary duties. So, they've got the memo. The central banks have got the memo. Parts of the institutional structures that most people don't, hopefully ever have to have anything to do with, because you really want your banking system working well so that we don't have to pay any attention to it. It's like plumbing, isn't it? You want your water to flow. You don't really, just make sure it happens. So what's happened right now, and that's why I was looking up that impact on the level of the non-fossil to fossil energy piece, is that countries grow and survive off their energy.
Yeah.
And the ripple effects of that, one product rippling through, the lack of availability, potential inflation, like each one of these just starts going. And so business leaders who are looking further out and seeing greater possibility, and like, okay, let's tackle these bigger things. These are important. Many of them are suddenly swapped into going, how on earth do we survive?
Yeah.
And that's what they're focused. And that is sensibly what they're focused on. They're going, how do we just get through this? And so it's not that they want to ignore the bigger pieces that, would be topics that would have otherwise talked about. It's just that they're literally going, if you're a senior executive in Japan or Korea and you're going like, we might be running out of power in the next 60 days. Philippines has already, so within the first 10 days, this is like astonishing. They've basically said, okay, we need to drop our demand for fossil fuels. People have a compulsory 4-day week to literally reduce demand for fuel. Like that is just a whole different level of change than we would have been talking about 10 days ago.
Yeah. All right. We're going to talk through some of the implications. David, did you want to have any final say before we move into the next section?
No, I mean, I think there is there are two things that goes along. The first is kind of like immediately, what do you do with the energy and all that stuff. There is that couples in, as Joanne says, with the move and recognition of alternative sources of energy in that way, whatever those sources are, and alternative sources of energy. And I think what Trump is doing in that way is shifting that energy away from that Middle East-centric focus. The world still uses oil and gas and coal for over 80% of its energy. Physically, it's not actually possible to make the transition that fast in that way. Doesn't matter where you are.
It's not going to happen in 90 days, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And the other aspect of it is that for the producing countries, a quarter of Norway's fiscal revenues come from that oil and gas sector in that way. So that's why it's keep exploring. That's why it's reporting major finds this week in its North Sea attempt. And that's why Trinidad and Tobago are restarting their oil and gas explorations, even though as they're running out of their reserves, are actually closing up in their productions. They're actually going through even deeper water to look for them, because the government's face of fiscal demand, it can't meet that by renewables, because you can't ship renewables in the same way.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, that's the dilemma that it faces. So and what the US is doing out of this is actually it is giving the energy to its friends, which is basically the guys who support Trump in that way, in all the forms. Oil at $100 is fantastic for them. It's going to kick up a lot of production in those places. In that way, it's relief sanctions on Russia in that part, and it's going to extend, whatever that conflict is, And the way out of the Russian-Ukraine war has been set out very clearly in terms of Trump's perspective of it, which is to give up on that part of the Ukraine that Russia wants. And so I think these things in the longer perspective have a lot to play out. China remains a key pivotal kind of Cold War enemy that's being set up. All of these are kind of creating, putting the countries that are on the fence of saying which side are you on, China or US, into actually saying, look, you're going to have to make a choice in this way.
What kind of timeline do you think that kind of explicit? Because the current administration is not known for being subtle.
Well, I think the thing to realize is that Biden administration was as much anti-China as the Trump administration.
Oh, that hasn't changed. That
hasn't changed.
Competition.
So from China's perspective, it's keeping a cool kind of face to all of this, but it recognizes that actually it doesn't have a friend in America. And what China is hoping for is for the rest of the world to recognize they don't have friends in America either. And as far as China is concerned, I think the changes in the military leadership and everything else has a lot of relevance to what it's doing in preparation in that way.
And we just saw its 5-year plan come out, right?
Yep. And what it's also been doing by some analysis is that it's produced more coal than it has used, and where's that gone is it started coal to liquids and coal to chemicals. Which is the worst emission path you can have.
All right. So I want to move us on to the next section. So before we go back to the war, what I wanted to talk about is why we can't afford war, right? So we've just learned in the last couple of weeks that global warming has escalated. We're now increasing at 0.35 C a decade. And I can't remember off the top of my head what it was before that, but it was significant. It was like half. And then in the UN IPCC report, basically said, and this is just a recent statement, climate change will likely make the world sicker, hungrier, poorer, and more dangerous in the next 18 years with unavoidable increase in risk. So unavoidable is the important word. So if you're giving birth today, by the time your child leaves school, that's the time frame that we're talking about. And so there was another sobering review that this one was published in the journal Environmental Research and Health. Extreme heat now affects 1 in 3 people globally. Anna was talking about the heat extreme alerts in Thailand, and obviously from 2023 onwards, I was in Thailand at the time. 23, 24, it was so uncomfortably hot. We're here in Singapore. 3 of us are here in Singapore. This last week's been brutal. So the extreme heat was usually around the April finishing in May timeframe. Now it starts in February, goes all the way through to May. But basically, in this report, it's making it hard even for young, healthy people to stay safe and do normal tasks. And here's some of the countries where outdoor work is restricted, or just doing anything outdoors. And this is for between 1/4 and 1/3 of the year for older adults. Southwest Asia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, or UAE, Iraq, Oman. In Asia or South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, and parts of West Africa, Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, Senegal, Djibouti, and Nigeria. So that's a lot of countries. And the thing is, this area is expanding. It's not just staying in those places.
I think there's something that those reports talk about, which is the physical conditions. But most cities cannot live without kind of an incredible kind of supply chain that feeds it. Just think about, the flow of food that goes into a city. And so the economic impact makes a lot of cities actually unsustained and unable to continue. So I just want to add that on to make sure that anyone listening kind of thing is aware. This is not just about the physical thing, and in fact, it's the economic impact and economic consequences that are that's going to hit you first.
And can I add on to that one just while we're doing the depression run? Is that because it is I grew up in my dad was an agricultural economist, and I grew up at agricultural research stations, and so I track what heat is doing to crop yields. It is already damaging crop yields. Countries that used to have rice surpluses are no longer exporting, and they're controlling. Japan last year released rice from its store because it was not able to. The piece that it's not just, is it going to get hot and horribly miserable? Is it going to be economically tough? Getting hold of food may be equally rapidly part of the thing, because already the heat that we already have so far, right day, not talking 5 years in the future, I'm talking here now, is already making certain sorts of food production and particular species are already very challenged. And it's not like you can go move a bunch of rice fields very easy. There's not much that land available to go and put rice on.
Yeah, and that's I think the point that most people miss, right? So I mean, first of all, the heat will kill you first. So whether it's food starvation or heat, let's see. But that's
or water, please.
The water. But it's also energy availability. So a lot of the countries we just met, we talked about, have a very, very, very poor infrastructure, which melts in the extreme heat, and so therefore people won't be able to cool themselves. Like you're talking about, when you look at that expansion of land and how much is grown there, the food that's grown there now, it won't be not available to the people that live in that area. It also won't be available to the rest of the world. So that's why it's the polycrisis. It's people think of one thing, but it's all of these different things that come together, and then rising violence, increasing violence towards women, because in extreme weather events, for some bizarre reason, men get more violent towards women. I mean,
they lose their
balls.
They lose.
What's that?
Go on, Joe.
It's about sweaty balls. Sorry.
Sweaty balls. Nice.
Yeah,
Anna?
exactly. I was going to say they just lose their cool.
Yeah. Well, I interpret it as fear, but then there's another piece in the Amazon that they think that 50% of the insects in the Amazon are not going to survive any increase in heat from where we are. So they're already at their peak, and so we know heat's going up. El Niño's on the way, and so basically they're already at their upper tolerance for heat. And so for a healthy rainforest, we need insects, and they pollinate, decompose, and do soil nutrient recycling, and so basically it's going to disrupt plant reproduction, nutrient recycling, and food webs, and then of course it's going to create greater changes through the Amazon ecosystem. So when people say to me, the Iranian regime are evil and we need to wipe them out, I don't disagree with anyone's opinion on the Iranian regime. I don't. I'm looking at these bigger stories. So one of the things for me about Iran is it's already run out of water. They're already going to have to leave Tehran. Like if you look at the bombing that's going on in Tehran, it's a city that's already scheduled to be on the move because they're running out of water. And then we're going to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of refugees. And where are they going to go? And that's going to cause societal disruption wherever they land, whether it's in their neighbours or they turn up in Europe. And then we're going to see more far right sort of people getting into power with strong men with simple solutions to complex problems that aren't going to solve anything. They're going to make everything worse, and our whole societies are going to get more violent. Life's going to be more miserable for everyone. So that's the path that I recommend we don't take. But it's also why I think we need to be focused on the bigger story rather than which side we're on in this war. David, you're smiling. Would you like to jump in?
Well, I think what is exactly right. For me, I've always kind of felt that this path is somewhat inevitable that we are on. Yeah. My base case is the sensible base case to take is that it's too late. These things are going to run their course. So how do you hold your path? How do you discover what your kind of what the person you are, rather than be flopped about by everything that goes on around you. And that's important along in that way, because I had a friend who many years ago, I was starting to work in finance and stuff, and he made a comment. He'd been, kind of more in the game longer than I had, and so on. And he was talking about how some guy who we met and so on. And he says, "Look, this guy's really kind of subpar, and not a great person, whatever. But you never know who you're going to end up relying on for a job later. So let's just be nice." And I think that's a really important element to kind of remember back in this sort of situation. Is this really that you don't know what the future is going to be. We're all going to end up needing people that we end up relying. The chances that we end up relying on people that we don't wish we need to rely on, but that's kind of how it's going to be. And that's a better attitude to think about in terms of actually how do you think of all of this through. That's kind of a little bit similar to what China's apparent silence is actually trying to do, versus the very kind of noisy reporting and everything about how evil was, this regime or that regime is, and all the rest of it. And in that way, it's recognizing, look, it needs to extend its hands out, and we need to do the same. So I was laughing in a way, in thinking that you point all these things out. Actually, it's good to just look at them and actually think, actually, what we're saying is these things will happen.
Yeah, acceptance.
So, how do you hold yourself true to who you are?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And you sort of mentioned the flip-flopping. We've got Aga here. Hello, Aga. A friend of Anna and I's. Anyway, so the first thing I want to talk about with the war is the environmental impact, and we obviously have no idea what the environmental impact, the amount of emissions, the amount of ecosystems that are going to be destroyed. But the bombing of the Iranian oil infrastructure and the black rain, and of course there's the short-term implications of it, but there's also the long-term implications of it. Which will be well and truly out of the media when those cancers and the other impacts hit. So basically, from an atmospheric chemistry perspective, the oil fires produce sulfur and nitrogen compounds that could form acids if they dissolve in rainwater. And there was almost immediately rainwater. We saw the water in Iran where it was on fire because the oil was going across on top of it. So there's the immediate impacts, itchy eyes, all that skin, all that sort of stuff. A child with asthma would be in real trouble. Elderly people would be really in a lot of trouble. So, it was a pretty horrible sort of aspect of it, but we don't know the bigger implications environmentally. And I heard an Al Jazeera, I know it wasn't an Al Jazeera, it was a group that talked to journalists about what they should cover in the war. And one of the people said, global emissions from the military industrial complex is 5.5%, which is the equivalent to concrete. So just think of all the concrete we see here in Singapore, right? And think about that all over the world, right? It is such a massive underestimation of emissions from the military sector, because basically no military talks about how many emissions it's creating. None of the main ones. What the US is doing, they're the biggest fossil fuel user in the world, the US military, but we have no idea what their emissions are. But any of the environmental stuff that's been jumping out to anyone?
I think, yeah.
I'll just say that I don't normally track environmental stuff, but I think one of the important things, as you were speaking, I was just thinking about this, is people don't hear this and say we're thinking about the environment as separate from people, but we're thinking very much about people and impact on people when we say the environment. I think I think very, very often people think, if you're worried about the environment, you're thinking about Gaia and not really thinking about people. But the impact is actually very much a human one. So when you talk about the acid rain, you talk about the changes to the climate, it's because it has a drastic effect on people. It's the extreme heat events that will impact people, that will kill people, that will I think when I was listening to what was happening in the Philippines and Thailand, I thought actually what is interesting about that for me, I think it's actually a quicker reaction by the governments there, which actually is a wise reaction, rather than what I think we're most inclined to do, which is try to keep the children calm. We don't want to make the kids upset, right? So I think most of the governments elsewhere, while the story of what's going on and what's really happening is probably evident to them, it's also not a convenient political story to tell. It's not going to be something you can put in front of anybody, because you can't do anything about it. You know, you can say that if you all come out and talk about the world ending, so to speak, it's not the way you're going to win the next election, if you know what I mean. So it's politically inconvenient to talk about the real massive problem, because if you talk about what's really coming your way, I mean, to think about starvation as a possible outcome of this situation right now, and we're not many steps away from actually being in a situation like that. Although arguably, when you're in Singapore, you're several steps away. But globally, I think that's something that it's an inconvenient story to tell. You don't want to scare the kids, and so you don't go there. And it's all, I guess, quite convenient as well that you got other noisier stories to tell. You know,
yeah.
I was going to say, you know, US over the sort of wintertime typically has, you know, because the continent's so big and because of kind of the Pacific and the Atlantic sitting between those things, get a lot of weather basically in that way. But over this period, it has seen pretty severe weather in that sense. You know, it's had these big kind of snowstorms and absolutely freezing temperatures along. And over this past week, it has had these big tornadoes, and they've stretched, that tornado alley has actually stretched quite a long way up now in the way it is.
Yeah.
And it's had these hailstones, grapefruit size, you know, kind of that sort of size, being blown about. It doesn't just drop on you, right? It gets accelerated by the wind and everything else along that comes along through with really big kind of, you know, wind gusts amongst all of these things. So this is the part of the environment and how it goes. I can't imagine how it's not going to affect the productivity in the US to be going through this. And the latest report is that there is going to be another wave of this sort of cold coming along with the snow and things. Essentially, all through that sort of weakening of that, you know, there's a polar vortex that goes around, winds that goes along very, very fast around the pole that keeps the cold in place, and it weakens and fingers down along with that. And as it does so, it causes all this craziness that you get along. And so we're getting a lot of that along in there. I think that's part of the environment.
Yeah, but link it to the war.
Well, I think that's the whole point, is that the war has taken attention away from these things.
Yeah.
So we're also fixated on the war, but like as Joanne says, you know, your reporting may be simpler because you're just reporting on the war. But the risks are actually much more broader, and they affect you in the ways that you think you're not affected by the war, but the distraction of it basically means that nobody is actually focused on your lives.
Yeah.
I think that's the broader aspect of the war.
Yeah. And that's why I think it's a good way to take it into the next topic, which is the impacts that we're seeing around the world, because the farmers in the US are also being impacted by the war because they're not getting fertilizer and it's crop planting season. So there's going to be food shortages down the track. So just to go through some, and then I'll pass over to you guys for what you've heard. But India is having a massive issue around cooking supplies. So people in their homes, they have a gas cylinder, which is still common here in Singapore as well. You have a gas cylinder under the kitchen bench. People can't get them, so there's massive lines. But there's actually not a shortage. There's a panic. Petrol for the motorbikes and stuff is definitely an issue. In the Philippines, and I mentioned it earlier, they have basically been told that they might be facing darkness in the evening to save energy. Now, this has other implications. So kids can't study for school. Women's safety and children's safety is obviously more at risk if there's no lighting for them to get around at night. So there's other implications for that. the Maersk, head of the Maersk, basically said, shipping prices have increased dramatically. They've already adjusted shipping routes with what's happened before, so that's going to be passed on to consumers. In India, the crematoriums. If you've ever been to India, one of the most astonishing things is to go to one of the areas like Varanasi, where they have the big wats where they cremate people. It's fascinating, but there's not enough gas, so they're turning them off. And in Australia, it was so interesting. The schools are being closed because the buses haven't got any petrol to get the kids to school, so education gets impacted. But this was a story out of South Australia. I was surprised they don't have electric buses at this point. And then fertilizer prices all around the world are going to be squeezed, which means food shortages down the path. So what else are you got? There's so many of those sort of stories, but what else are you guys noticing?
Well, I think one of the things that got me about the fertilizer story, for instance, is that I think the reason why it impacts that as much is what people are missing. I must confess for myself as well, completely missed it. I mean, if I heard the prices of fertilizer were to go up, I would just think obviously just about the transport and the availability of it. But actually, it's in the manufacturing of the actual fertilizer that these prices, these energy shortages actually impact that. So LNG is a very large component of the process of creating most of the modern fertilizers that we use, the artificial ones. And so the extraction of ammonia, that requires a lot of energy, and that's usually powered by LNG. And if I'm not wrong as well, one of the components of LNG actually also forms part of what the fertilizers are made of. So it's that sort of thing. And in fact, when I was preparing for today's show, it was just striking how everything was interconnected. Like, this this thing on this end was connected to that and to that and to that and to that. And it's I mean, we've often heard the idea that our world runs on oil. And it largely does. And the thing about this is that there are two things happening at the same time, which cause a lot of disruption. One is our reliance on fuel, the fossil fuels as we have them, and the other actually is the transparency or the quickness or the what's the word for it, of the markets, right? It used to be that I think in a previous time it might not quite have been as much of a problem than it is right now, because right now, when there's a bomb that goes off in Tehran, the market in some other part of the world can immediately respond and overcorrect and do something really weird. Like right now, the situation is like the Americans are facing a situation where their oil prices or gas prices are like through the roof. And it's a product of the market mechanism that causes that to happen. Whereas in terms of the actual supply for the US and the ability to provide themselves fuel, the prices should not have gone the same way as well. It's just the market reacting the way it does, because everybody charges as much as they can. No one goes, I want to charge as little as I can for what I have. They want to charge as much as they can. So the price is supported now at a high level. Companies are going back into business because the price has gone up, and now it's viable to do all this exploration. I was thinking earlier as well, for all the people who thought that Venezuela was not a viable place to drill, suddenly it seems like a different story as well. But it's about this combination of the world that we have right now, where we have imperfect logistics, if you like, but perfect markets, which allow the prices not to reflect the actual situation on the ground.
But Joe, on some of that, yes, I know the prices have gone up, but the question is, how long are they going to stay up at that level? Because a short-term pip looks great, but if it's for 10 days, 3 months, oh my God, if it is 3 months, that's going to do some weird things in the global economy. If it's 6 months, some major things on the global economy. But it actually, the capex that you need to go and invest to go and open up more fields, or to drill and sustain, this isn't stuff that's, a 6 month write-off period. This is usually 30, 50 odd years. It's really long. So, I hear some of it and I go, yeah. And if I have my, pointy pencil out, really how long will that margin last to be able to support that story? But it makes for a good story.
Yeah, no, I'm going to ask David to jump in after this because he gets this bit better than most. But Australia is one of the countries that is least. It's got the least. It's not abiding by international law about how much energy it has in the country, even though it's a mass exporter of things like coal and gas. Fossil fuels, it doesn't have enough, right? It's closed all of its drills and all this sort of stuff. So what I always say, it always comes back to is energy independence is critical. So when it comes to whether or not countries will say, well, we're going to invest in this. So I mean, the time frame of the impact that we're seeing right now, no matter what, even if the war stopped tomorrow, minimum 6 weeks to 3 months before, because I think Qatar's closed its gas fields down, and there's some other older infrastructure that basically by it not producing, it's actually going to be permanently damaged, right? But I actually think it's going to get countries to say we need to get more independent, and that means investing in fossil fuel extraction so that they're not in this situation again. I don't know, David?
I think that's right. Just a first point about the fertilizer thing. The reason why gas price is important is because natural gas is made up of carbon and hydrogen, and ammonia is made of nitrogen and hydrogen. And you get plenty of nitrogen in the air, but it's very hard to get the hydrogen. So gas is used as a source of hydrogen to make the ammonia, which is what you need as the stuff for plants to grow along with providing the nitrogen in that way. And that's why when gas prices go up, as it did in Europe in 2022, fertilizer producers stopped manufacturing because they weren't sure they could actually sell their product at the higher price in that way. And so farmers delayed their planting and everything else that trickles along. So to the and that actually points to the difficulty. It's very hard to get hydrogen. It's very likely it just flows off in that way. So that's why you're always going to end up back in gas. So the other part about kind of the oil and stuff, I was looking at the rig counts. This is the number of rigs that you have that are operating in the US, mostly in the Permian fields where the shale oil has been, and that hasn't yet popped up at the moment with the oil price going up, which is kind of to Joanne's comment in a way of saying what it is. But what it does do as a backdrop is that it makes is that when you actually look at global exploration and what's going on, the costs are being reduced. So while people think of kind of AI improving energy grids and doing all those things, it's also helping oil and gas and upstream activities to find the place and to find out drilling and so on. What people don't realize is that drilling today is not vertical. A lot of it's horizontal. That's how Norway is expanding, for example. Goes down and the drill pipes literally go horizontally, weaving in 90-degree angles and stuff going left and right in that way to get to where it needs to be. Is actually quite incredible about how it can do this in these days, and it's getting deeper in that way. So even this sort of shock along in it, what it's showing is that the energy demand, people do not really expect the energy demand to come down. The energy demand has been constantly growing. And it's been growing even more. So it's kind of like, growing at something like 2% a year in that way. And you can bring on renewables, but in terms of the global energy demand versus that, you're still going to end up with a gap in that way along. That's why from 1990, I think from the beginning of the UNFCCC to now, we've had enough renewables to supply the annual needs of South America and Africa included in that way. But we still have been producing more oil and gas and coal all the way along. So what this war does is, as it knocks out the production facilities, which is, it hasn't really done so yet. It hasn't widespread knocked out the production facilities in the Middle East in that sense. It's the sense that actually you're going to need more oil and gas demand. And the other side of it is actually that the AI demand is not shrinking. The military use and the expansion into the military is going to keep increasing. So, you know, if you are making a bet on it and trying to say, you know, I don't care what I invest in, I'm just going to invest in whatever it is, then you're going to invest in defense. You're actually going to invest in oil and gas in that way. You know, they are surer than something like renewables to invest in, because renewables have a lot of political pressure and is very subsidy driven. And when the fiscal situation turns tough, those things get squeezed.
Yeah. I was just showing the emissions graph, how it's just growing and growing and growing. Yeah. All right, you're on mute, Anna.
And that's only up to 2023. So just imagine what it's like if you go and take by the time we hit the end of this year.
Still going the same direction. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I actually have the 2024, but I just couldn't find it as quickly. But yeah, okay. So talking about the bigger implications. So Nate Hagen, so he does a series called The Great Simplification. I'm just sharing one of the videos, and I shared it with you guys, and I did a very, very quick summary, because I think understanding the implications of what's happening, especially if it goes on for a longer time. So he talks a lot about energy blindness. So what Joe was basically talking about was he's sort of coming to terms with how energy is everywhere in everything. So by us not understanding that, we are energy blind, so we don't understand. And, you know, so basically what's happening here, the Strait of Hormuz disruption we don't just see it in oil spikes. It's also, it threatens the physical basis of food, heat, transport materials, everything. And some of the things that he talks about, the knock-on effects, which I thought was interesting, is one is sour crude. And that's where we get sulfur, which means we get sulfuric acid, which is all part of the copper and cobalt extraction. So if you look at the world that we're building now, the amount of copper that we need to extract from the earth and put into play is more than all of the copper that we've extracted since human civilization first began. So it's going to impact our ability for that. You were talking about ammonia, urea for the fertilizers, which the LNG disruption, especially in Qatar. And then petrochemical feedstock. So it's not just fuel. It's plastics, textiles, so polyesters, medical supplies, industrial inputs, and there's lots of others. And then obviously modern military. That's a big one. And yeah, so I mean, you know, the implications are absolutely outstanding, you know, and I think that's, you know, the point that we need to really get across and stop being energy blind. You know, most people don't understand how this all works, and I get it, but we do need to understand it because it's important, but it changes the conversation. There's a lot of naivety around fossil fuels, especially in the activism space. It underpins the system of everything that matters to us as far as how we live on Earth. You know, so they'd like to.
And Andrea, just to add on to that one, evidently the value, it's believed that the value that you have from fossil is wasted it being a fuel. Because of all the other things that those compounds are able to contribute to, which you just listed. So in some ways, part of it, you know, there's a misnomer, because we call it fossil fuel. We think about just the power part of it, and these other components just completely get overlooked. But, you know, on a systems thinking point of view, there's also issues. One of the planetary boundaries that's breached is the nitrogen phosphorus cycles, and that's called too much fertilizers. Another one is the particulates in the air, and part of that is through these kind of productions. And then there's the novel chemicals, all these new products, which largely are also come out of it. So it's not like there's just one, yes, understand it, but also realize its excessive use is creating all sorts of other compounding problems in our system.
Yeah.
So
which
what's
is why
an
it's not
alternate
just
name?
climate change, right?
Yeah, exactly. So what's an
Yeah.
alternate name for fossil? I'll just call it fossil. Don't call it fossil fuel.
Yeah, it's a
Well,
fossil.
I think
David?
the point is that these are oil and gas and coal. How you use them and what you use them for is entirely up to you. But that's what they are.
Yeah.
I think the essence of it, and there's a part of it which is that they are enablers. They make it possible to do all kinds of things which are terrible and all kinds of things which are good. And typically what people talk about is the good things that they do and forget about the bad things. And that's the essence about energy. It doesn't matter what the form of energy is. It makes us feel a little bit more hubristic about what we can achieve, and we tend to focus on that. The mention of copper, the expansion of copper mining, China has been is a major driver together with the rest of the world in that respect. And a lot of that copper mining has become very artisanal, kind of very, very badly that actually treats people in horrible ways along. The expansion of what's called critical material and what it is, and all of those things, they're only possible because we feel that actually is our right to use energy in the way that we think is going to be the best. So it really doesn't matter what you think of. If you really go down to it, there's no such thing as clean or unclean energy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. All right. Any other thoughts on Nate's sort of summary of the risks? No? Can we move on to?
Well, I was just going to rub everybody. I was going to rub everybody the wrong way and just up against the grain of the fur by just thinking about this, right? I mean, if you think about it, the use of oil and the fuel and whatever the way we do, actually, it's the ultimate recycling.
You mean over 100 million years kind of thing?
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. It's upsetting and just being cheeky in the moment. But
no. I mean, I get that, but I think it's really interesting point, because if you look at how nature recycles on the surface. And so we're trying to have this very long time scale thing. All this stuff was buried way deep in that way. So it's a different sort of recycling, and even our own kind of 360 mentality about recycling is actually trying to say it's okay we recycle our copper and our kind of rare earths and whatever it is, as long as we recycle it. But that's not how nature recycles. Nature recycles as a service. Has a service cycle for carbon, and there's that very deep cycle that we're kind of churning up in that way. Yeah. And so the recycling thing, you're absolutely right, because it brings out this whole aspect of actually saying all these things are very kind of ways to try to rationalize the fact that we are using resources in our thinking, to our thinking.
Yeah,
it's a bit like a relationship. I think
Lord Vader for a while there, just to make sure that
I was speaking with someone, and they were saying to this lady, and she was telling me about how this is all a very masculine view of relationships, effectively.
Yeah, I was looking at a paleo story where for hundreds of thousands of years, Earth sort of was volcanoes were going off, lots of but the temperature of the Earth didn't increase, and the geologists and the paleologists and whatever they're called, paleontologists, were like trying to work out why didn't go into a hot house Earth, or why did it start to go into a hot house Earth, and it was at the point that it hit the fossil fuels. That's when it turned into a hot house Earth. So it went for hundreds of thousands of years without switching the Earth's sort of environment or atmosphere. And then as soon as the burning got to the fossil fuels, that's when the Earth flipped into a hothouse Earth. And there's another great one. I think I shared it with Anna recently about a geologist that looks at CO2 and how we use it. And we've never like there's this straight up line of burning that has never existed in the paleo record. So it's an interesting one. But we were talking about man. So I wanted to talk about machismo and the Secretary of War. Now, excuse me, if you know me, you know I am not a fan of Pete Hegseth. I could say if we were at a bar having a drink, I would be much more explicit in the way I think about him. But earlier in the week, the Guardian released a title saying "A very dangerous person, alarm as Pete Hegseth revels in carnage of Iran war," and it's so horrible to hear the way this man speaks. Right? There's no respect. No matter what you think of war. There's always a respect, between the opposing force, and it's just contempt. And it sounds, like a bully speaking. We'll kick them while they're down because that's what you do. That's that sort of language. But then Carol Cadwallader. So if you haven't done it, there's a new a publication called The Nerve, and it's a bunch of women who are all from The Guardian and The Observer. They've set this up, and she was the one that went through all sorts of stuff, and she termed the word tech broligarchy. And it's hooked on dopamine, fueled by testosterone, powered by AI. This is the broligarch's war. And it's a really, really great one, but there's so many things in this that I love. But it starts with chaos, information systems, and Trump. And basically, the brand is chaos. That's the defining quality of everything that Donald Trump is doing. It's also the state of our information system. We're trapped inside the never-ending algorithmic scroll where our dopamine-fueled lust for the endless new is Trump's literal foreign policy. And she's saying the chaos is like a cognitive assault. Our extrasensory information landscape engages our frontal lobes in the busyness of mental processing from which no meaning comes. I just thought that was such a beautiful way of describing this time. As someone who's been paying attention to the news cycle for many, many years, I absolutely agree with it. But the next one was just like going back to Hegseth, the news cycle hasn't just moved on. We are now deep into the testosterone zone, the fizzing, almost sexual excitement of war. And I just, that to me is just really. Joe, do you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say, I'm just thankful that we don't have full body coverage of Pete Hegseth when he's making those war announcements, because there is that really a real great sense that he's getting a hard on while he's doing that, and I just it's like as much as he's supposed to have laid off alcohol, he seems to have substituted whatever it was that with power and machismo. I mean, it sounds like someone at the sidelines of a baseball game where there is no. Actually, not a baseball game. I was thinking more like American football, but there's no safety gear, and the objective is not just to win the game; it's to kill the opponent altogether, right? I mean, that's just the kind of stuff going on, and that lack of respect for anyone else except Team One. That is a crazy thing. There's no sense of there's no sense of the senselessness of destruction. There's no sense of that death is not a great thing. I mean, like, even if your enemy is vanquished and you've killed a lot of people, it's not a good thing. You're supposed to have a sense of regret that was part of the process. You don't just celebrate the kill. You're actually trying to get to the other side of it. That's what at least traditional thinking about war has been or used to be, and that's just not the kind of stuff that's going on right now. it's almost like if you spoke of those kinds of things, you would be sandbagged. You
You'd be
wouldn't be
woke.
part of the. You wouldn't be part
No,
of the
you,
team. Maybe too woke. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
You'd be
exactly.
thinking too much about the opponent. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no dignity in it, right?
Well,
Joanne, David?
I was going to say, the one thing, and it's not just Pete Hegseth, it's the whole kind of administration and the policy, and this sort of very transactional approach. I think if you take the word humanity and you kind of say, well, what's the essence of it? Is empathy and compassion. Is kind of the ability to see ourselves as more than just us, but also the other person. That's what makes it. That's what we mean by the word humanity. And there's none of that, because what it has done is to say how we are the one and all the rest are the zeros. And I think that, what we're going through is this very dramatic shift along. There is going to be a pushback, because I think fundamentally people don't feel that. I think that fundamentally, as an individual, they feel that actually they are a part of our humanity in that way too. And they may be fearful of what it is. They may be fearful of everything else, but that sense is always going to be there. I think that's kind of a very lasting, a very, what ties us to our creation that we have around with us. The part I think that's therefore kind of quite important as you look to these events and all of these things. We may laugh about that and sort of says how terrible this person is and write things about how terrible those things are. What we need to do is to bring out the aspect of how we ourselves might be, how we may feel within those situations, and actually allow ourselves that chance to step up. I think that's really going to be quite important along with this. We are going to face a regime of toxic politics. I was writing a talk yesterday, and I was making, and in this thing I was basically saying how, for a younger generation, they're going to live their entire life through extreme uncertainty. For their children, they will not have known of a world where the world was in a sense of stable in that way. That is the likely reality of that. So accept that, and actually then start thinking about actually what is that core essence of to be human? What is that core essence of actually what it means to be part of humanity, and actually be able to expand that along? And to what Joe was saying, I think that's the essence about, when she sort of, give this sort of, idea of what ESG actually means, right? Kind of what you really want to bring forth with it. It's not the box ticking. It's not whether you perform better. It's none of those things. It's the fact that you have a business because you actually want to contribute to humanity. So do that.
Yeah. I just wanted to just bring Joe back in on the other point that came up in Carol's article, and we can see, Anna, if you want to jump in. But the question, of course, is, well, first of all, I think the US has finally claimed responsibility for the killing of the girls. I haven't heard Trump acknowledge it yet. But the other thing that's obviously come up is that AI was used in that, identifying the school. So there's an investigation that seems to be pretty thorough going into that. Was AI involved in targeting the girls? And were they the collateral damage of an AI hallucination? That's basically the question being asked. So I think this is an important topic that's come up, and it goes back to the tech oligarchs. So Peter Thiel, Alex Karp, who to me are speaking just in the same way. This excitement about war, getting hard-ons talking about it, like you said. But Joe, that sort of putting that focus on AI and war.
Yeah, so you probably heard about all the talk about the drawing of the red line against autonomous target selection, and for quite a bit of time, people just thought Anthropic was being really high-minded and ethically superior about the whole thing. Not quite exactly that. We'll talk about that. But when it comes to targeting, I'm sure you saw the picture of of where the school was situated and how it looked in terms of a target. It's not to be it was previously a military building, to be fair. So if you had, depending on how you looked at things and how you assessed it, it would be viable to consider that building. It would be as human an era as it would be an AI era to say that that building was military because of its location and because of its history, because of its shape and everything else as well. And so that aspect of it is there. Now, whether or not AI was used targeting, I think it just by virtue of the number of targets that were selected in Iran, more than 1,000 targets. The implication there is, yes, AI would have been involved in that because it would have been part of the process of recommending. But it would then, of course, have gone into the next phase, because I think there's still the internal conventions still are that you have to approve it. So somebody would have looked at the data, seen it, and gone, yeah, that would have been an appropriate target. The risk that goes with that is because there's a bias towards agreeing with what AI proposes. So AI can be quite convincing, as you've seen before. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it before as well, where a hallucination comes up and it looks completely fine, except that because it's about you, that you've never been part of that association, that it suddenly says that you were, right? So that's the risk that comes along with it, and that's what Anthropic was actually trying to do. Anthropic actually was taking a stand in terms of saying, in terms of selection, in terms of being able to select autonomously targets and stuff like that. They believe that the technology wasn't at that stage yet, and so they were not prepared to sign off on that. They were not in any way against the idea of eventually having autonomous target selection. In fact, it's if you look at the receipts, they have in the past, and I think until very recently as well, was still saying that they were okay to develop it. They're saying that they in the next iterations and as it developed further, the technology would arrive at such a point where it was going to be reliable that way. But they were just saying that, no, it's not time yet for that. So as far as autonomous selection is concerned, they were marginally, better than OpenAI in the sense that they just thought they weren't ready to do it yet. So they weren't going to just they weren't going to okay it. So that's what's been happening over there. So back to the question, was AI involved? There is hardly anything where AI isn't involved anymore. And if there was an image, and if there was intel, it would have definitely been part of the process. Can you blame AI? I think as long as somebody has to okay it, you really can't. And I think the danger is that you come to a process where you say you don't know what's going on anymore. So in terms of what's happening, for instance, in AI, many times the people who are behind AI can't tell you exactly how something happened or how a conclusion occurred that way. When there is the risk of human life, or when there is when there is a mortality attached to it, it's still out there in terms of really what would be perfect. Because I think what you do want to really have, and this is going to be something which is going to be completely controversial. If you could develop a perfect morality machine, if such a thing could possibly exist, you might be able to do a lot of things where trolley problems were solved very quickly, and you could have quick
trolley
outcomes.
problems.
Well, the trolley problem is basically the idea that if you're on a trolley on a train track and you're going down towards two situations where if you let the train go all the way down the track, it's going to kill 5 people, or you have a chance to throw a fat man on the tracks and he'd get killed and you'll stop the killing of the 5 people. Which would you choose? The ethical machine should be very easily come up with a solution that the death of 1 is definitely better than the death of 5. But morality, as we are behind the wheels or behind the steering wheel, it's a completely different thing. We would do different things, we would choose different things, and we would agree on different things. So that's the trolley problem.
the iRobot scenario, right? Just before
Yeah,
you talk,
but I
David,
think
want
that's
to-
really interesting to
I want
bring up.
David, I just want to get Joanne a chance
Yep.
to sort of jump in.
I'm curious where we're going to go on the AI ethics piece. But just before I move to that, to loop back, one of the things that I found really interesting the last 2 weeks is the fact that I don't know how many of you noticed that a whole series of tech went down last week. Okay, so I was using some global tools, and they stopped working, and that was basically because the AWS servers are being targeted as critical infrastructure.
Really, that rolled out that way? Oh, okay.
That's
It was an AI outage for a bit, right?
Amongst other things, but that's because that's probably the environments you're working on.
But the data centers are so distributed around the world, right?
But
So
evidently the process. So this is I got this from techie sources. So I'm just going.
Okay.
I'm attributing to techies who were chatting techie, and that's what they said. It was basically the AWS servers got knocked off, and basically it took a couple of hours for the network to repair. And that was just sort of like, okay, that's another piece of the whole mix of things that are going on. That previously we would have said data centers were civilian infrastructure, and now because they can be used in this way, they now become part of the military infrastructure as well.
Yeah.
So we've got some differences.
And Iran said that they're going to go after the tech infrastructure because it is military infrastructure.
Yeah. And they're being more, from what I can gather, they're being very targeted in that way, whereas some of the UNESCO heritage sites in Iran have been very significantly destroyed and damaged, and usually that sort of thing is considered, you don't touch. So there's some weird ethics in terms of site selection going on. Some of it can be around data and availability. But what I find interesting on the AI and the ethics piece is I was speaking with a gentleman based out of Europe who does a lot of work, and this was on the European conventions and commission around that topic. And at the end of the day, different value systems are at play. If you talk to somebody from the traditional cultures in Australia, they'll have a different set of values on what's right, wrong, and what should be respected versus somebody who comes from South Africa or North Africa or different parts of Europe or the US or Latin America. There's not one universal set of this is the right choice. Because Joe, if that fat man had have been Placido Domingo, there might be a lot of other people who are saying, you know what, no.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting. I think
what Joe.
All right, David, and then we're going to
look through the rest. With the trolley problem and the AI, what Joe's sort of saying is, the essence of the trolley problem is not to solve it. It's like the Kobayashi Maru in sort of Star Trek. The essence of it is that there are scenarios where you have to consider what you will do, and that's how you develop your own sense of kind of ethics and morality. And the idea of allowing the AI to resolve this because they can come up with an answer quickly is denying the very essence of the fact that these are challenges that we need to face ourselves and decide what we may do and how we come to terms with our own choices and our own actions. That's how we develop this sense of empathy and compassion into our actual personal lives. Because it's not the bombing of the girls in the school, it's the bombing itself that is the question. And by allowing sort of this other track to take over the discussions, what you're doing is you're just simply dividing up between it's okay to kill these people in this way, it's okay to kill them in that way, it's not okay we do this or we do that, and you draw little boundaries along in order to try and avoid having to actually say what is it in terms of the relationships that we need with each other, going back to the beginning, going back to the ISSB and so on, with each other in this time that we face. And what all this war is doing is actually taking the attention away from asking those very fundamental questions. Our world is changing because physically it is changing. Our relationships with each other needs to be changing. And what we're doing is allow one country kind of extreme machismo, as it were, if taking that sort of Peter Hegseth type kind of commentary and so on, to dominate the conversation, to take it away from the ones that we were having just a moment before.
I know. I think the Pete Hegseth and that whole behaviour. I think it's a good thing. Just we're going to talk about inside the manosphere a bit later. Is what are you watching? But I think it's a conversation we need to be having, and having it so garrulously on display. It's like, is this really what we want as a global society? Are these the people we want leading us? You know, because we can see where they're leading us. We're suffering from where they're leading us, all of us, no matter where we are. But I want to just quickly go through some points, because I want us to make sure that we do this in 2 hours, right? So first of all, I'm sharing an interview with the Deputy Prime Minister of the Iraqi Kurdistan region, and I think it was one of the most dignified interviews I've ever seen, and I thought it was just a beautiful example of it. The other thing that's being openly discussed is the belief that Israel will use nuclear weapons, whether it's tactical or the proper thing, but that is being openly discussed. And I think that's obviously creating a lot of concern. This was a few days ago, and I don't know how much it changed, but apparently 93% of Jewish Israeli respondents to a survey approve of the war, and 73% or 74% are supporting Netanyahu in this war, because of course there's this big religious sort of link to it. And you know, that number's extremely high, obviously, you know, when you can, especially when you compare it to America, and especially when you look at where this potentially could go for the entire world. We were talking about the bombing of the school. Within days of this war starting, there's been more war crimes committed by the US than in any other previous war. And you know, I listened to one of the guys that worked with Colin Powell in the first Iraqi war, and he had stood in front of you know, whatever lawyers or whatever, or judges, because of the war crimes the US committed there, and he was talking about how many war crimes have been committed. So whether or not that's going to come and get up. But I just want to quickly mention one story that you might have seen on social media is all of these people leaving the Gulf states and they're abandoning their dogs. Have you guys seen it?
No.
Have you seen any of that?
Yes,
Right. So,
and cats, to be fair to the cats.
yeah, obviously. Now, I get that people are emotionally connected to animal suffering, but the other people left behind, the Filipino maids, the Pakistani drivers, and when you look at the people who are in the Gulf states, India 9.1 million, Bangladesh 5 million, Pakistan 4.9 million, Egypt 3.3 million, Philippines 2.2 million, Yemen 2.2 million, and then it's Sudan, Nepal, Syria, and Sri Lanka. And the GDPs of the countries that they come from rely on the remittance that these people send back to their countries. So when you talk about the economic implications, these people who are left behind, and you think of the construction workers, or the guys building the data centers out in the desert, all those sort of people, right? They're not going to be getting paid. They're not going to be able to take care of their families at home, but the countries that they come from will also have a double whammy on their economics. So I get that people feel sad about dogs and cats being left behind, but there's a lot of people being left behind, and I hope these people who are paying like $150,000 to get their private jet to Turkey to escape are actually also considering the people that they've left behind and taking care of them too. David, did you want to jump in?
No, I was just thinking about I've got, but to the point you're saying, absolutely. I mean, I think the repercussions of this war is, for me, is not just the energy. It is back to that sort of what you were saying about that manosphere type behavior amongst the world's leaders. I think that's what it's going to do. It is going to promote. It's given a boost up towards a very sort of you know, my bet's bigger than yours, so I'm going to beat you up type mentality.
Excellent.
within that sort of international politics as we go forward. I can see, especially in lots of areas, maybe a little bit less within Europe, but even within Europe itself, Europe had long tradition of that too, in that way. So and it's going to be supported by the fact that the complexity of the problems we face and the inability for us to finance the dealing of them. We just don't have the money to do that. Or the governments don't have the money. The private money is going to keep to themselves, as I was saying earlier about the private markets. It's going to keep itself locked away safely in that sense, or is pretense of safely, kind of.
I was going to say nationalization. What should happen?
Oh no, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what about final points? We're not going to get through everything, and we'll go into the closing up. But what do you think, Anna? What we've discussed so far, or anything you want to finalize with?
I will actually finalize with there are countries who've dealt with a hell of a lot worse than what we've talked about today. Countries that have dealt with hyperinflation, countries that are in multi-decades of war, that the war crimes that we're seeing and attributed to Iran have been going on at a far greater extent. But to David's point, the biggest question we can ask ourselves is, how do we want to show up? Who do you want to be as a human being through the midst of this? And sensibly, how do we make informed choices that will lead to a more comfortable future? Even if that future might be a lot simpler than we anticipated it being, 4 weeks ago.
Yeah. Joe?
Well, I was thinking about how we're all sitting on this big dashboard with all the switches and all that, but nothing's connected to anything. It's like we're going to try to make an adjustment here, do something there, maybe take this here, change that there. But we're actually we're actually retailers or retail people in a market that's not been driven by us. It's actually driven by the governments elsewhere. Decisions are being made at much higher levels that make no difference to us. So I think one of the things that we can get some kind of peace from is getting a better understanding of how the whole thing works. At least we get to see what the puzzle or what actually is behind the whole thing, and we can kind of go like, okay, at least we have an idea what we're doing, so that when we make decisions, at least we can say that on a basis of the foundation, or what foundations that we've kind of based those ideas on, we can actually have some certainty about it. Because I think there's nothing worse than just trying to decide when you have no basis for it. And unfortunately, currently, the situation is such where if you look for leadership, there's never been a time where we've needed leadership more than now, and where it's been absent, as in like it's been inconsistent, right? You try to hear and listen out for the reasons for something happening, and you go to the source, only to have the source contradict themselves within the same press conference, or they claim that they misspoke. It's all these different things right now. So that the level of uncertainty is extremely high. So much so that I think in terms of the case for anxiety is very, very strong right now. I will say that as a trader, I mean, the opportunities that this time presents is it's amazing. I mean, if you talk about volatility and where things are going, and if you have the right discipline, the right kind of thing, you can sort of prosper in this environment as well. And I know this may upset people to hear that people are prospering in this kind of situation, but I think it also reflects a little bit about what we need to do with ourselves. We need to prepare ourselves to be able to do well in those challenging situations. So I know for one that I am not prepared for the absolute breakdown of society. I don't have the go bag that Andrea and family have.
How do you know that?
Well, you've been telling us, right? You've been telling us, so I assume it's true. All I've got right now is that I think I have too many. I've got an ample supply of bacon, which will probably not last very long. But apart from that, I don't have very much in terms of those. So, but it's about being prepared for those things, right? So much as I'm prepared to to take advantage of what's happening now with the markets. I think what we need to do is prepare ourselves to be well positioned for things as they happen. So, like what's happening in the UAE currently in terms of people being, so some of them are being fleeced in terms of, like if you want to leave the UAE, there are numbers of ways of doing it. One of the ways I heard of is to spend £5,000 per person on a like in a taxi kind of situation. So if you have a family of 4 to try and get out of the UAE, it would cost you £20,000. Which it's one of those situations, and if you, I guess, if you went into the UAE thinking that at some point we may need to flee in such a way, you'd be prepared for that. But if you're like most people who went to live in the area and work there, your life is not based on that kind of eventuality. Your life is not based on that, so you don't have the kind of resources, and you don't have the choices that people who were prepared for that have. So it's a kind of a crazy thing, but the preppers have a point, and I say that to Andrea as a prepper.
I wouldn't consider myself a prepper in the conventional term. I really wouldn't, because we've got a bag with all of our documents, the paperwork you need. So
Right.
birth certificates, marriage certificates, all that sort of stuff. It's all in one place and it's movable. So that's the prepping. But like one of the pieces that we didn't cover is the anti-Muslim rhetoric that's growing, right, especially in the US, but across Europe, and with migration, the anti-Muslim rhetoric is growing. And I mentioned it last week. So I got on the road for the first time in 1992, and I went through Egypt, Jordan, and Israel. And back in 1992, I was 22 years old, so a young blonde woman from Australia who'd never left the country before, traveling by herself. I experienced some pretty horrible treatment from, I was in the army then, so I was I was tough and I didn't take any nonsense, but a couple of guys tried to rape me, but it wasn't that bothered me as much. It was people spitting on me or crossing the street, the place in Israel called Mia Shearim, where the really, really Orthodox Jews live, and for someone like me, I'm just a heathen, right? I don't know if it's still the same. So I feel like we could be returning back to that time. And I remember when I first came to Singapore, there were a bunch in the office I was building, and there were a bunch of Malay guys, and I presume they were from Indonesia, because I actually went back to challenge them after the fact. But I walked past this corridor and they yelled out, "You American whore." And I was like, I was walking and I was like, I'm not even American. But which, so stupid, right? But I came back and I just sort of said to them, what the hell are you guys on about? That's what we're going to move back into, where that sort of feeling towards us, whereas since then I feel like we've come together and there's more understanding, and people aren't as harsh in their judgments of others for being different and all that sort of stuff. And now we're going back to that. And while people in the Pete Hegseths or the Trumps of the world don't really give a shit, right? That day-to-day experience for all of us, male, female, so the people, having to leave a place because you're no longer welcome. I'm here in Singapore. I've got my one son doing NS, another one could be coming up. He's coming up to do his NS. But there could be people in this country that start to sort of hiss at us because we've got white faces, right? And that's the risk of what we're allowing to come back. And that wasn't a nice time for anyone. And I just really want to encourage people not to get caught up in that, because if we, Anna said it, David said, who do we want to be as we move through this time in the world? We're moving into hardship. We're moving into, there's no doubt life is going to get harder. But do we want to get harder, or do we want to become more compassionate and work together and try and solve these big problems together? And if we splinter now and allow the people who are doing that to succeed, all of our lives will be worse, all of it, and it's going to be hard enough. So why do we want to make it worse? So that's my my
Very, very, very
conclusion.
true. Very, very true what you say. I was going to add by just simply saying that I watched the program last night. It was about Dunblane. Dunblane is a situation in the UK back in about 30 years ago. I think it came on because it's an
30 years,
anniversary
wow.
of it.
Yeah.
There was a shooting in a school. A guy with a handgun went in there, intent on kind of going into school assembly and basically killing everyone there. A primary school in Scotland, and he got the time wrong, basically. So he then went around and shoot the people kind of more in the classes and stuff. And the reason for that was because that then got the Snowdrop campaign. The parents got together and they wanted to do something. They wanted to create a petition against handguns. They were making the point that he was a person intent on doing this, planning on it, and it was because he had practiced it and all the rest of it. And they, at the time, I think this was a very moving bit. They were in probably January, February, or whatever it was. I don't remember when, but the snowdrops were out, and they were looking out on outside, and they were seeing snowdrops, and they're saying, what we want is that by the next time the snowdrops come out, we want to be able to do something about the handguns in that way. And ultimately, eventually, that led to the banning of handguns in the UK. Now, you can still buy handguns under special licenses and those sort of things, but the situation that went through was that was achieved. Along the way, there are all kinds of discussions about legitimate uses of handguns, whether for Olympic events or for other things and so on, whether one caliber should be preserved because of that and other things. And I think that's one of these things that is very important to distinguish between actually the thing we are being asked in difficult times is a much broader, simpler question. Who are you? Who do you want to be? How do you want to be? And when you try to delve that in sort of becoming very, very more qualified ways, that's where we end up splitting our identities. That's where we find that we are actually only friends with these people or with that people in that situation. Is that way. And I think what the Dunblane situation with these people was, they actually went and managed to bring together a majority. I think the lady gave a talk at the Labour Party conference along that time, and I'd love to be able to try and find that talk again, because the show was extremely moving along the way, and that really just swung the whole Labour Party, which followed the Conservatives from winning a landslide election, and that finally allowed the final piece to come through. So that aspect of us being who we are, have power, was very much demonstrated through that.
Yeah. All right. So just quickly wrapping up. So you've watched the Dunblane massacre sort of anniversary. So worth watching. Anything else that you're doing to keep yourself distracted, David?
I'm watching The Mentalist. So all about reading people and how this detective or police consultant does his job by reading people.
Oh, it just never appealed to me, that show. Anna, what are you doing to keep yourself distracted from all the horrors of the world?
My favorite ones are art, because that puts me into a totally different mental space. And then secondly, writing. One of the reasons we're doing a new book. It gives me a way of creating sense and structure.
Yeah.
And that may it help other people as well.
Yeah. No, definitely. Writing's always awesome. And Anna creates wings. So it's a shame you're not in your house, because you could show us some of your recent creations. So we've got Lord Vader here. Joe, what's keeping you distracted? It's usually pretty good.
Well, I was actually delighted to hear that David is watching The Mentalist, because for one thing, I'm an aspiring mentalist. I have a number of routines that I want to unleash on the world one day. And I also happen to be rewatching the series right now, right alongside. So I presume it's the release on Netflix that has prompted this for you, David.
Yeah, it is, and I'd always been half watching it and stuff, feeling probably a little bit like Andrea, but I've really got into it. So I'm second season, really getting into it.
Yeah. But the other show that I would like to recommend, I think you'll like it from a strong woman perspective, is Down Cemetery Road. That's on Apple TV. It's a short series. For those of you who like a show that starts and ends, you'll like that show.
Who's in it? Is it?
It's with Emma Thompson.
Yeah,
Emma
it's
Thompson
brilliant.
Reed.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good show. It's made by the producers of what's the other one now? Slow Horses. So it's
That's right,
the
yeah.
same. Well, I won't say the same sort of vibe, but there's that sort of energy around it. So it's nicely done. Great storytelling. I think you'll enjoy that.
Yeah. No, Emma Thompson's character is absolutely sensational, but a cold hard bitch at the same time. You wanted to sort of become a little bit more human at the end, but no. Okay, so if you need a laugh and you don't mind inappropriate humor, the TED TV series, second edition is back, and that's on HBO Max. So one of my sons signed us up for that after I cancelled Disney because they supported something Trump did. So have you guys ever watched the TV series of TED? No?
Is this the animated bear, the first two movies? Oh yeah.
So
it's always. Look, I hear you need to start with a blunt or two to make it more accessible, but
you can't do that here.
I've watched Father Ted, which is absolutely lovely.
Very, very different. No, it's very funny because it's Mark Wahlberg plays the adult friend. So this is teenage Mark, and it's incredibly inappropriate, but at the same time, like the father's this 1960s, 1970s grumpy father, and the wife's the housewife, and it's just fascinating. But the other show I want to recommend everyone to watch is Inside the Manosphere, and there's lots of conversation about it, which is great. I actually watched it with my older son Lex, and I'm going to watch it also again with my younger son Jax. And if you've got sons, I really recommend watching it with them because it was so interesting to hear what the world that is presented to them on social media that we never see. And thankfully, both of my boys don't like the guys in the Manosphere. To me, the Manosphere is a pyramid scheme. At some point, there's going to be a fallout because the promise that is made. You're going to get rich. You're going to make so much money. And one of the guys, this British guy, like he's basically in Marbella, and his whole day is spent creating content, walking around insulting women, trying to pick women up. There's some really quite unpleasant moments with this guy, or beating people up that he thinks are pedophiles. And that's what he does. That's his entire day is walking around. And the way they talk about women is disgraceful. But at the same time, I think we've got to have an honest conversation about the women in it who are influencers in their own right. And they're often linking to these guys to get a higher profile and more cred. So it's a really, to me, Inside the Manosphere it's the beginning of a conversation that we need to be having because, the Manosphere is not a pretty thing. And none of the guys I know in the Manosphere, but there's a lot, and the young boys and really, really young boys and Gen Z is more misogynistic than the boomers, right? So we've got a problem with our young boys, and we need to address it. So I think it's a discussion point. So it's not a chill out and relax.
Yeah,
but
I saw it presented on my feed as a suggestion, and I just felt tired before I hit play. I went like, ugh.
But it's Louis Theroux, so you know it's going to be. He just does that stuff so well. I recommend it. And you might have to watch it tonight.
I'll be educated.
On a different thing, if anyone wants to read, I'm reading a book which is called Very Brief History of Life on Earth. And
who's that by?
It's just looking it up. Very brief history, very short history of life on Earth. And it's basically about how the Earth and life on it came about, and it's by Henry G.E.
Okay.
So very short history of life on Earth.
And what's that thing again? Reading, is it?
Yeah, I know. I find that such an odd activity to do, but it's actually quite pleasurable.
Yeah, it is. It's important. All right, Anna or Joanne, sorry. Thank you so much for coming and joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed being here. And thanks, guys. Big conversation. Richard will be back next week. Haven't got a guest for next week yet, but we're working on it. So if you want to come and join the show, if you've got something to add to the conversation, we're always happy to welcome new people on. And just want to say thanks to everyone for being here. Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.